odd moment, I've got to deal with this matter. And once you uncover that issue, there's a whole line of the other ones, all the way, there's hundreds, thousands of them, and some are much more serious than that.
I disagree with that.
Well, you don't even know what they are, so you can't just say, I don't agree, you disagree with what they are.
Well, give me the last one.
Well, I mean, one of the big things that shook me as a Christian when I was at uni studying New Testament, I think I knew about that before that actually, but was the Gospel of John. Have you noticed about the Gospel of John's a bit different from the other Gospels? Is that?
Yeah, but yeah.
In the Gospel of John, you have a Jesus who is very clearly divine. Before Abraham was, I am.
Yeah.
He comes out with statements like, I am the light of the world.
That's very strange. I've never had a Muslim say that. Okay.
You never heard a Muslim? You should talk to more Muslims.
As in, I agree that he claims to be divine in John. But
Absolutely, he does. But let's look at how. Let's look at how serious it is. I am the light of the world in John, I should say. Before Abraham was, I am. I am the resurrection of the life. I am this. I am the shepherd. I'm the good shepherd, etc., etc. That's all there in John, isn't it? And Jesus talks endlessly about the relationship between the Son and the Father. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and so on. Now, there are verses in John which contradict that, but I'm not going to go there. I want to focus on the ones where he claims divinity of some kind. So Jesus walks around saying, I am the light of the world, yeah? Before Abraham was, I am. This is the Tetragrammaton. You know about that from Exodus 15.
Yeah.
The question is, and the scholars have noticed this, if you read the Gospel of Mark and Matthew and Luke, nowhere does Jesus say any of these things. Nowhere does he talk like that. Nowhere does he say any I am statements at all. Why is that? And these are earlier, they're dated chronologically earlier. So Mark's the first, then Matthew and Luke about 85, 90 AD. John towards the end of the first century. Well, you don't, anyway. We're not even as big as Gorney yet.
Yeah.
So the question is, if Luke, for example, the beginning of his gospel in the prologue says, Dear Theophilus, I'm writing an orderly account for you, giving you an account of all the things that happened amongst us. So he's intending to give a full account of the life of Jesus, a bios, a biography. Yeah? Why did he not know that Jesus went around making these statements? Or if he did he deliberately leave them out? What's your theory?
As in why he specifically doesn't say I am.
Well, we've got all these I am statements in John. Jesus went around publicly saying this, according to John, the last of the Gospels. Matthew never bothered to mention it. Luke never bothered to mention it. Mark never bothered to mention it. He's never mentioned in Acts either, but we'll leave that one side. Why is it that no one in other Gospels knows that Jesus spoke in these amazing, extraordinary claims at all, apart from one Gospel, the last to be written?
Well, I think he claims he's Lord in the other Gospels. He just doesn't use I am.
Lord's ambiguous. Kurios in Greek can mean anything from a teacher, as it still is in modern teacher, it can still mean that, all the way to Yahweh.
Say the first word.
Kurios is the word in the New Testament meaning Lord.
Okay.
Yeah, it can mean teacher. It normally does mean teacher. It doesn't mean God.
I
There's a spectrum of meaning. Okay, well, there's some free information for you. So if I was to call you good teacher in Greek, it would be good kurios, good teacher. It does, but the context would tell you what's meant. One can't assume if one Jew is talking to another Jew in downtown Palestine that one is telling the other guy that he's the Lord God. That's not an assumption one would normally make. Okay, it would normally be that he's addressing him as teacher. So Lord does not mean God. It can do, but it doesn't necessarily. And the context we're talking about almost certainly doesn't mean that. It means teacher or sir. It can even be just sir.
In that case, I don't know how he can claim to be God.
So, coming back to the I am statements, which are unique in only one place in the entire Bible, in the New Testament, only found in John.
I see what you mean.
Why would Luke leave this stuff out? If Jesus went around publicly saying this, and it would be widely known, Luke boasts that he's doing always surveying all these things from the beginning, doesn't mention it, and ditto Matthew, ditto Luke.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, so assuming that I can't find a verse that says Lord, I have to use I am in the first two Gospels. I don't know off the top of my head. I think, I don't know. It just seems a bit of a weak argument. I don't really like it.
Well, what's weak about the argument? I haven't even made an argument. It's a question. I've not made an argument yet. I'm observing the Gospels and the very different way Jesus portrayed in John than he is from the Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So I'm asking a question. I'm not making an argument yet. There is an argument, but I'm not come to that. I'm asking you, given we agree on the facts, how come none of the early Gospels knew that Jesus went around talking like this, if he indeed went around talking like this? Does this strike you as particularly strange and historically odd that if Jesus had said these most remarkable things, made these claims, that no one seems to have known about it? Do you want to know what your scholars are saying?
What do they say?
Okay. They have concluded, for a number of reasons, not just for the reason to do with this issue, that the fourth Gospel is a highly interpreted meditation on the significance of the life of Jesus for the author. It's not history. So the argument is this. So the argument is this: the author of the fourth Gospel believed Jesus was the light of the world, clearly. So he puts those words on the lips of Jesus and has Jesus say, I am the light of the world. He believes that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I am the way. So he puts those words on the lips of Jesus. These are not historical words of Jesus. They are theological words put on his lips by faith, the Christian faith that believes that is the truth about Jesus.
I probably need to go.
Of course. But these ideas are not coming from atheists. They're coming from Christian scholars, a number of which I've read. They're coming from your own scholars. But you see, from a Muslim...
It's not the strongest to me.
Okay, but you've got to... You see, I think the responsibility that... I don't really mean a moral responsibility now, but in principle, the responsibility of someone in your position would be to come up with an explanation. Not to simply say, I'm not convinced. Because the problem is there.
I can see that even if the Bible has errors, it's still okay.
But this is not an error.
What is it?
It's not. No one's made a mistake here. It's a deliberate portrayal of Jesus according to faith as it existed towards the end of the first century. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate.
Okay, right. Well, as in, like, if we're using the Bible's eyewitness testimony, the New Testament at least, and then trying to warp it to have a different perspective, that's not true. I guess maybe mistake's not the right word, but a lie or something.
See, I've heard Christian scholars say, very eminent professors, again ordained clergymen, say, just because, and they would agree that John is not giving us the historical Jesus, but they would say, and this is where up to you what you believe, or I believe, that it's still true what the Gospel of John says. It is true that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It is true that he is all those I am statements. It's still true that it's not historical. Now, I have a problem with that. You probably do as an evangelical. I can imagine I had a problem with that because it means you're believing in a make-believe story and believing it to be true, not just in a literary sense or theological sense, but in a historical sense. Because that means the real historical Jesus didn't say these things. And what the Jesus that's left is very much like the Islamic Jesus, a Jesus who is sent by God, a prophet, a messenger, and so on. And that's where it leads ultimately, if one is open to to the only religion on earth that gives us that understanding of the historical Jesus that matches historical research.
I think that's difficult to believe.
Okay. Again, you say this repeatedly without giving reasons why.
Well, because the Quran came many years later.
Did it? What do Muslims believe about the Quran?
It's eternal.
They believe it's the speech of God. Do you think God existed in time before the 7th century? Do you think he's a creature in the universe?
I get what you're saying.
He's a timeless being. There's no before, now, or present with God, I mean. So the revelation was received by Muhammad in the time of his life, of course, but the revelation itself is not created by
it's strange
the man.
that he would seem to correct the revelation.
Why is that strange? Isn't that something you'd expect from God?
He made it wrong in the first place.
But who corrupted it?
Muslims.
No. Who came up with the idea of the gospel about Jesus being that Jesus died for the sins of the world? It's not something Jesus taught. It was something that Paul taught, and Paul never met Jesus.
I don't want to get into another debate. But,
Okay. Anyway, so these are some of the questions that Bob the Builder, but he's not always the most easy person to talk to, whereas you're obviously very polite and easy to talk to. So. I should keep an open mind about Islam, keep an mind about the Islamic understanding of Jesus. I find it very compelling because it's also the historical Jesus, and that's where even Christian scholarship leads in that direction, in terms of who Jesus was, what he taught, for example. And it will lead away from Christianity, because as we understand it now, because that worships Jesus rather than God. And Muslims are very, very keen on pointing out we should worship God alone, without partners, without associates. But Christians don't do that because they worship God and Jesus.
I think they're both God.
Well, then you believe in two gods.
I don't want to get into Trinity.
Or three then.
Fine.
Okay.
But, I do have I find there's issues with the Quran in terms of its preservation as well, like the errors. But
you have issues with the preservation of the Quran. Interesting.
Yeah, or that and the
what issues?
That with the Bible.
Really?
Just,
what's our oldest New Testament manuscript that we have in the world currently?
300.
It's the Codex Sinaiticus, which is literally a mile in that direction, the British Library.
Yeah.
Do you know what it's dated from? Mid-4th century.
Okay.
That's the earliest Bible in the world. Mid-4th century. It's 400 years after the birth of Jesus. What's the earliest, in terms of manuscripts?
Okay. So
how
I don't want to go into manuscripts.
Okay, I thought that was you. Well, you said that was an issue.
It is an issue for me.
Oh, so that's
It's
okay.
more
We have manuscripts going back to the time of the Prophet. That's what I'm trying to say. Now.
I mean, I think that's an unfair comparison. So obviously, it came
Really?
600 years later, but that's fine. I can see that. It's more how they had to burn all the Qurans. Uthman had to standardise it, and they were killing each other over it. To me, that just seems like there's clearly an issue. But,
So you've looked at, you don't want to get into that. Well,
I'll hear a response. But
I think it's a misunderstanding of what happened in terms of the recitation of the Quran and wanting a codex, a written Quran, as like a template, and it was copied and sent out around the Islamic Empire. As the Quran was recited throughout the empire, it was losing, for some people, it was beginning to be, there were dodginess was entering into it. We needed to retain the integrity and reliability of the Quran, and so the original companions of the Prophet formed a committee, not just Uthman, and compiled the standard written version, and any other copies were told to be destroyed. So it preserved the integrity of, and it's now widely accepted by most scholars that the Quran we have today is.
How are you?
I'm good.
Hi.
How you doing?
I was just about to leave first.
Oh, you going out already?
Well, I was about, did you want to ask me something?
No, nothing. Have you been here for a while or just came?
Just a couple of minutes.
I've been for like an hour.
Okay. You had enough about the park?
I have to go to church.
Oh!
I'm already well for like half an hour.
Go ahead then.
That's my fault for detaining him.
No,
Come on, Paul.
You can take over for me, David, if you want.
Take over for you. What's happening?
Anyway, I'm not sure we can just pass on the job, but so I think there's a misunderstanding about the actual story. But as I say, the preservation of the Quran is now accepted by most Western scholars. The Quran we have today is the same Quran we have at the time of the Prophet. Well, have you seen the Birmingham Codex at the Birmingham University?
That has issues with the current Quran.
I've spoken to Professor Thomas, who's the head of department there, who's the expert on this. I've interviewed him on my channel. He disagrees with you. How's your Arabic, by the way?
How can you tell what he's saying is true?
So,
see, this is always the problem, right? You can make these claims.
No, I'm not
and
making
when
these claims.
challenged, then it's
No, I'm saying
completely.
I've spoken to Professor Thomas, who's at the University of Birmingham.
One person. Okay.
Yeah, just one person.
Then Stephen Shoemaker doesn't agree with you.
Okay.
Right?
Can I talk to this?
And
okay.
then what?
Right.
So when we
Shoemaker is someone else. I'm just talking about the person.
But why should we believe that just because one person says something?
He's not just one person.
Okay. Who else says that the Birmingham Codex proves that the Quran is exactly the same as when it was written down by either
The vast majority of scholars. The vast majority of Western scholars
I
do.
don't